I think the onus sits with you and your organisations to actually think about this in a much more broader brush way, not relying wholly on the sophistication of a record system that says whether this person is suitable or not. So, in a word, I guess we could call it safeguarding. And safeguarding is a very broad brush term, meaning lots of things. So it might be about safer recruitment. You know, how do you recruit your host families? It might be about the vetting processes, the checking processes that you do when you do your inspections. It might be about the early warning indicators of what you think might be a precursor to a crime. It might be about understanding grooming processes. That's when an offender starts to walk down a route of grooming a victim or a potential victim to a possible assault. And how you recognise those triggers in the grooming process to actually take action early to prevent the abuse. So let me just go back a little bit, because I want to come back to safeguarding, because I think that's where we can all share and add value to the way that we protect young people. Just want to go back to the story about the Spanish boy and me looking at how bad is this for us in our communities, and that question. It turned out that this offender had been hosting, as I said, for three years. But not just with this one organisation. He'd been with at least 7 different organisations. And even though we then found that 1 or 2 of them had had problems with him and actually dropped him, nobody else knew. So again, comes back to something that QBS was saying to you earlier about sharing that information. If you do not share this information, the picture is blank. You're not creating, you're not contributing to the jigsaw picture. And without that information, nothing can be done. And these offenders will go on and on and on in a degree of safety because nobody's doing anything about it. I don't want to labour the point about this, but let me just labour the point a little bit more. When I started to look at this closer, and the way I did that was by getting some Home Office funding. So I got some Home Office funding and some European Commission funding to say, look, I think there's a big problem here. I've done a few knock on the doors and found out a few other bits of information, and I took it to the Home Office and got some funding and started on a journey of research. And that research took me around the world a couple of times, going to different countries, investigating different crimes and allegations around this, doing research on this specific area and looking at what went on. And what I found in the first 12 months, I uncovered 2,000 cases of abuse. Now, of those 2,000 cases, less than 1% of those have been reported to any law enforcement agency. And that's quite important. So if you're trying to do the maths on that, don't bother, it's quite small. You know, that just reinforces, again, what QPS was saying about the underreporting, one of their concerns. Well, they have a right to be concerned because the underreporting is still as high now as it ever was. And there's just been a piece of recent Australian research that verifies that, and I'll come on to that in a moment. Now, underreporting, quite significant. However, the underreporting is to the law enforcement agencies. That doesn't mean to say that there's underreporting per se. What victims will do is they potentially will report to somebody. and it will be a friend, it'll be a counsellor, a welfare officer, a teacher, a colleague, an organiser, a leader, a supervisor, and you all have different names of different types of individuals that have responsibilities for these youngsters in whatever area that you come from. What happens in significant numbers of cases is suppression. That's the only way I can describe it. It's suppression of the facts. So there is a stopgap between agencies and organisations of not exchanging that information because of several reasons. One, disbelief. Two, disbelief that this person is an offender. Two, disbelief of the young person reporting it because they think this young person is a bit dodgy anyway. Other reasons to do with the organisational structure and the way that the system doesn't allow it to pop out. So there's no process, there's no procedure, there's no way that this can actually find its way to a law enforcement agency in the first place. So my challenge to you is to go back to your organisations and in the very first instance look at things like your policies and procedures and think about this. Do you have a policy or procedure in relation to child protection? Number one. I'm not asking you, so you don't have to nod or stick your hands up. Do you have a child protection policy? Do you have a grievance policy? So if somebody makes a grievance about something, there is a process. And do those processes dovetail into the local authority or the state system? Social care, policing, because of the reporting processes that exist within Queensland, for example. Does it dovetail in and does the process join up? So, for example, does your organisation have a child protection designated officer? I mean, is this person by default called something else, like an accommodation officer? The reason that I need to try and get you to think about that name of child protection designated officer or nominated officer, whatever you like to call them, is that you're giving somebody, and for me it's got to be at least two people in the organisation, at least two. You're giving people within the organisation the responsibility for specialising more than the rest of the key staff in child protection related issues. Because actually, child protection and the issues around abuse are extremely complex, and they're not for the faint-hearted. They are not for people to be dabbling with who know very little about it. So in terms of expertise, somehow your organisation has got to make the leap from not knowing very much to putting something in the hands of the authorities, which might be intelligence, it might be information, or it might be a disclosure, or it might be an out-and-out abuse case, which is obvious. But either way, this is excellent, actually having people here that you can put names to faces, have phone numbers and all that. This is part of the process of actually building the networks, building the rapport between these organisations, so that in the future you can make that phone call, even if it's to say, look, I'm concerned about this, I don't want to make it official, but can you give me some advice? At the very least, that's got to be the way forward.